very different things. And when that user group that you're giving it to, your stakeholders, doesn't buy in or doesn't use it, for one, it doesn't feel very good if your work goes unused, but also if it's not used in a good way or ignored, it can also cause a lot of damage, and I've actually seen this happen. And so, from my perspective, making the numbers work is not a trivial task, but actually getting the buy-in from your stakeholders is just as hard, and in my experience, actually sometimes harder. I think people are very difficult problems to solve, just as hard to solve as numerical problems. And so this is something that definitely many organizations, especially when you get to first generation models that are just hitting user groups that have never seen them before, they definitely stumble over this. And Church Mutual has come a long way in this department, and I'm just going to kind of share, from my perspective, the recipe that has seemed to work pretty well, and it's really this equation. And we're gonna build this up, so I don't stare at it too much right now. But in order to kind of build this up, you have to understand a little bit of the story of Church Mutual Group and kind of where it's come from. So, in the last, since the end of 2011 to the end of last year, the company has grown a lot. So this is, if you're not familiar with insurance, this is just revenue, net revenue after ceding reinsurance transactions. Has gone from 467 to 772 million, 65% increase in that amount of time. Our surplus has gone up 65%, a couple $100 million in that time. That's a lot of profitable growth in a pretty short amount of time. That's not that common, and what's happened between this valuation and this one is really the build out and implementation of a complete analytics suite. Not complete from my perspective, but complete enough to get things rolling. So a lot of good things from a financial standpoint. If you look at our major competitors, this is data sourced from AM Best. If you don't know who AM Best is a ratings company. They rate insurance companies just like if you bought a bond or something, it would be rated. Hopefully better than the mortgage-backed securities from years ago, but from a financial strength, we're in a different class than most of our main competitors. We have a lot more surplus dollars, which is kind of like assets minus liabilities, your money in the bank, owner's equity. And among these two major competitors, they each have between $50 and $100 million of policyholder notes, which in accounting speak is a loan, but it gets counted as surplus in accounting, statutory accounting. So if you were to actually net out their surplus for the loans they've had to take on in the last few years, we're in a very different level of surplus, and our leverage is much better as well. From a rate of return standpoint, we basically beat them pretty significantly, whether it's return on revenue or return on equity. And that's a good thing. I always say that I'm working very hard to try and drive these companies out of business so we can take their whole book of business, but it takes time to do that. All right, so coming out of 2011, Church Mutual really needed some kind of guiding focus. The financials were in pretty bad shape. The CAT exposure was I would say generally not extremely well managed, in some cases not managed at all. We actually blew through some reinsurance treaties in 2011, which is something that if you ever are in charge of reinsurance contracts, you know that that's not a good sign when things like that happen. Analytics were just flat out just missing in many, many instances. The only department that could access data was the IT department. Literally, no one else could even get into the data. The rates were not in good shape, and that year started with one credentialed actuary. One person was trying to manage this big organization from that standpoint. Today, we've got these full departments built out between actuarial, enterprise risk management, and BI. That's about 27 people. We have 12 credentialed actuaries. We actually have a whole crop of people that are very close to getting their credentials as well. So that number will grow pretty rapidly, which is a good thing. All these teams, we can get into data directly ourselves. We tap into everything with SAS. We're a very strong SAS shop. People are very good at manipulating and running data with SAS. They're good at that. Pretty much the big diagnostic gaps have all been filled and integrated into the financial planning. We're getting into financial planning right now for the next 5 years, and so that's the big hoopla going on right now. And analytics from a predictive standpoint are fully operationalized in the rating algorithms and in the workflows. Which one of those two do you think is harder to get into? We could have a 3-hour discussion on that in and of itself. CAT exposure, much better. We have a full ERM spread at this point. We know what risk we're taking on, and we have a formalized risk appetite that we're comfortable with.
I have a question. That predictive analytics are operationalized. What does it mean? So I mean, you develop a rating plan, and you're saying you put in this directly into.
In this case,
into this
directly inserted into rating algorithms or into people's workflow, things they must do.
So like if you're building a model in SAS, you're saying you're taking that model and putting this directly, that's what the rating is using, rather than converting this into some kind of a rating table, set of rating tables, and then becomes your.
It's kind of a combination of rating tables, but think of it as we build and formalize all these tables, file them with the departments of insurance, and then every time somebody hits quote, it flushes through the algorithm and changes their premium up or down based on characteristics.
But how is it different from what the other insurance companies do? That's what I'm trying.
Well, other companies would use predictive models in their rating algorithms as well. I think the difference for Church Mutual is just that within our niche, we have a great asset in that we hold the vast majority of data for the niche. So our competitors, even if they wanted to build a model, they're missing a lot of data from the niche that we have. So they can't build the same model that we have because they just fundamentally are missing the data to build it.
Yeah, I'm just, okay.
We can talk after. All right. So things have gone pretty well overall the last 7-8 years, but they definitely didn't start this way. So my first couple years at Church, I was managing some other stuff, bringing reserving in-house to set up liabilities for unpaid claims. And then I came over and started leading the predictive analytics group. So I picked up somebody else's model that they had built. And this was kind of my first year, was people coming up to me and saying things like this, and voicemails and emails to me. And so I'll read some of these to you. This one's my personal favorite. I hate it. That's like pulling the parachute after you've already hit the ground. I don't have confidence. And these exclamation points are real. These are real conversations that people have had with me. And some more good ones for you. This is another good one. I'll live in your ivory tower. This one's probably my favorite of all time. Sounds like a perfectly logical explanation, which will make sense once I go bang my head up against a brick wall a couple of dozen times. That's when you know you're really having good times with a group of stakeholders that are not on board with what you've implemented for your model. So this is kind of what I started with, and I was like, oh, what have I gotten myself into here? And it's really taken, I would say, a couple of years to turn some of this around. And so these are some diagnostics from the first year of our last model version that we ran. And so when we deployed this last model version, we spent a lot of time working on ways to attract and target new business. In this case, new business in that first year was up very significantly, between 17 and 38%, depending on how you're looking at things. And of the way we were targeting accounts with the sales reps, we had about 40% of their new business was in our model targeting analysis. So that was a great top line outcome for new business, and our retention was extremely solid as well. For those of you, how many of you work in insurance? A lot. So Church Mutual is weird from a retention standpoint. This might seem like an insanely high retention to you, but understand that if retention got to say 90% at Church Mutual, it would be a riot that would be almost happening. It's just a high retention organization. It's very different from most commercial companies. And in fact, when it was in the low 90s, people were very upset, and that's where a lot of those quotes came from. So it's just something specific to the company. And occasionally I hear this these days. Thank you. Largely related to this, to the new business. We're very interactive with the sales team. And I want to be clear, though, that by no means Church Mutual have complete buy-in from everyone. That's not the case. But I can tell you that I don't get those nasty emails, phone calls, and conversations anymore, and that's at least a good start in my book. So, kind of the formula that I think we've tried to use here to get a lot of this is what I lead this committee. It's called the Predictive Model Committee, And really think of this as a stakeholder challenge team. If you don't work in insurance, you can think of this as just any of the stakeholders in the company, whether it's IT or any other department. And so what we're trying to do is just get all the big stakeholders in there. And in this case, I put this team together. I had a few of them already. And they went through with us for 20 months through data orgs, model builds, and implementation, start to finish. They were with us through the whole thing. And they literally, I had them go through, and they had to review and sign off on every single variable. They took the axe to some of them as well, which was kind of hard to let go of some of them statistically, but that's fine. And then they also did the training. The point of having these people go through this whole process is that by the time they get to the end of it, they're ready to do this, to train their peer groups. And it's not a trivial thing to get people to that point. And in this case, this committee, a Diamond Award is kind of Church Mutual's highest internal honor, so to speak. You get your name on a plaque and some money and whatever. Anyway, so they got that.
Can I ask a quick question before you
Yeah.
move on?
Go ahead.
I'm surprised to not see any type of IT as part of that committee. Was that considered?
Yes. So IT, our interaction with IT is maybe a little different than it might be at other companies. So Church Mutual, well, it's not a small company, it's not a huge company, it's kind of more a mid-sized company. So actually, like my team does a lot of pseudo IT things. So for example, we maintain our own model rating engine, and we're directly connected to production, and we're responsible for that. So we actually do a lot of pseudo IT work, and the work we do with IT is more pure IT. It's not as much business as these groups are. So yes.
So project-based initiatives can be contained within the groups you have listed, where IT would get more involved with the framework that you're using?
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to boo-hoo IT, but in this case, I'm tending to use them more from, hey, look, I need this technical thing to happen. That's exactly what I want you to do, and that's all I need you to do. Not to say that they don't have valuable things to contribute, because they certainly do, but just the way that this group works, they kind of not typically involved. But I do work closely with them, in fact, so closely that some of them are sure annoyed or scared whenever their phone rings and I'm calling them. So that committee maybe seems almost kind of like common sense, right? But the thing that is tricky about this is that I'm typically looking for very specific things and characteristics within that committee. And that's what I want to kind of cover today. So first of all, I'm looking for people that can issue what I would call a logical challenge. I want someone who's going to say to me, I don't like this because of this, and this is what happened that I don't like. I do want people to show up with actionable evidence. I am not interested in spending time talking to people who are in the business of stonewalling or opposing just for the sake of opposing because they just don't like it. If you can't show up with something actionable for me, it's not a good use of my time or my committee's time to work with you. So, but what I also want to be clear about though is that I think it's super important to find the people who are the toughest critics, the people who, they may feel like the biggest thorn in your side, but they're probably one of the people that you should most likely consider incorporating in your feedback loop. As long as they show up with this. If it's someone who just does this, no. If it's someone who's really difficult and hard on you but shows up with actionable evidence, then I very much would consider including them. It's going to make your life much harder over the next 6 months and much easier over the next 3 years. All right. Front lines. I generally like to find people who are impacted by the model that I'm implementing on a daily or near daily basis. I really like people on the front lines because they tend to know details extremely well. I'm not saying that officers and others don't contribute because they do in their own way, but generally speaking, a lot of those people are too busy or too far removed from the details, and they're just not quite as helpful as some people like a direct salesperson who's on the lines every day, knows the coverages backwards and forwards, knows their peer group, how their peer group is feeling. That kind of detailed knowledge is extremely helpful. I'm also looking for people within their peer groups who are known and respected by them, people who are good at their jobs. If I'm looking for someone from sales, I'm looking for someone probably in the top 5 salespeople in the company, as an example. And I also want people that are vested. And generally people on the front lines, especially if they're in sales or underwriting and some of these other places, already are vested already by their goals or their compensation. Every once in a while you can find someone who's willing to do things just for the sake of duty, but they're not always too easy to find, or their schedules are already too busy. All right. As an example, my wife told me I need some more pictures in this presentation. These are quotes from someone who's on the committee. When they were telling me these things, they weren't on the committee. I was in Texas, and I was in the field working with our account managers and sales reps. In this case, this was a sales rep, and he's the top sales rep in the company. And he spent probably about 4 hours on a Friday morning just yelling at me, driving me from account to account, telling me how messed up everything was. And these are some of the things they told me. I was so impressed by the way they yelled at me and gave me all the things that they thought were wrong, but also told me how they could be fixed, that the following week I asked them to join the committee. And they stayed on the committee for the entire build of the second generation of the model. So that's just trying to give you an example of, don't run away from these people that are very critical. A lot of times they're actually the key to turning the stakeholder sentiment around. It's very difficult sometimes to work with them, but if you can win them over, then you can win anyone else over in their peer group. All right, handedness. I really feel, and I try very hard to create an environment on a committee where people can say whatever it is they really want to say. I really feel that people need to come out and say if they think that you're just plain wrong, or really, I especially want them to say if their peer group just plain won't support it. Because why in the world would we ever move forward with something that a peer group is just going to be flat out against? That's crazy. From my perspective, if things are working well, there should never be a decision that just goes through without any challenges. There should be routine challenges, and occasionally you should feel very insulted and sometimes offended. And I've had this. I've been in meetings literally where I've left feeling just terrible because I've been yelled at for the last hour, but then I have to remind myself that this is actually the environment we're trying to create here. I want this to happen. I want people to feel comfortable enough to do that. I always say, leave your feelings and your titles at the door. I don't care if you're an officer or a frontline sales rep. People need to be able to say what they really think, or you're not going to get a good feedback loop and you're going to miss stuff. All right. This is another quote from a committee member. In this case, this individual was a division manager for sales, and he was very pissed off, frankly, about what the retention numbers were running, and he felt like we weren't reacting fast enough to respond to what was happening with retention. And in this case, he didn't understand exactly what he wanted to happen from a modeling perspective, but I knew what he really wanted, and we took 3 months and made some model changes, and retention went up a couple of points after that, which is a lot when you're running retention in the low 90s and you're trying to get it to the mid 90s. So again, this is a good example of where I want someone to feel comfortable enough to say this in a committee meeting. That's fine. Just let me have it. Spit it out. All right. Again, this is somewhat an environment thing, but democratic. I want people who can work toward a shared goal, people who can acknowledge the constraints of others. I'm not very interested always in people who are very much only for their own department and stakeholder group. I own this decision. This department owns this decision. I don't want to hear that. We all work for the same company. We have this shared goal. I expect people to be able to work together on the same team toward a shared vision. And you have to, one of the ways I think helps do this is if you actually let people, the stakeholder group, make the decisions. And in fact, like I mentioned earlier, I actually require the people from these different groups to sign off on the model structures and decisions and every variable. They have to approve it, or we're not moving forward. If they don't like it, we have to keep going through this until we find a solution. Sometimes we just vote, right? We're not voting on what the statistics are, they are what they are, right? but it's about the implementation. There are a zillion different ways to implement the same numerical result. I really feel that you need to give people this opportunity to decide their own fate in some ways. And it's very helpful for getting their buy-in. This, to be honest, is somewhat of my personality characteristic, but I am always looking for people who are in the business of getting results. There are some people who tend to kind of work around the edge of a problem, so to speak. And then there are other people, and you probably know some of them or wherever you work, who just, they can look at a problem for a few hours and get right to the heart of it and figure out how to solve it. I'm always looking to find these people. One of their characteristics, in my experience, is that people who deeply value time, people who aren't wasting time going to random meetings and whatever. And in my experience, one of the ways to help keep these valued people on the committee is that I will never ever have a meeting unless we're actually deciding or doing something that's actionable. So I might have a standing meeting that I cancel the 3 out of the 4 until we have enough and we're ready to use that 60-minute period or whatever it is in a very useful manner. In order to keep these kind of people going, they have to be on board with your vision from the start. So like when we started that last model version, I knew exactly what the vision was that we were trying to get to. And the first couple of meetings were all just about getting those people on the same page. Because that, whatever the goal is you're trying to achieve, whether it's the statistical lift or increased transparency or whatever, that becomes your guiding light from the committee. And in order to satisfy these people, you have to actually accomplish something, right? You have to meet the goals. So if your goal is lift, maybe there's a G that you're after or something like that. You have to actually accomplish these things. All right, 2 more quotes. These are from 2 different members. They're also on the committee. One's from product and one is from sales. In this case, this product person, very team player mentality, was saying that I really hate the implementation schedule that's been created because it separates out, it doesn't keep the division states all together. It's more handy from a filing perspective, but it really sucks for those people to be separated and pulled into different trains over time. It's good feedback, not a bad thing, a good thing. In this case, this was actually an officer from sales who was saying that I understand that numerically this concept of blanket coverage doesn't mean a lot to you for a small policyholder, but it means a hell of a lot to a salesperson, and so you can't just take that away without a retention new business impact. So again, good feedback loops. All right. If you've gone through all this other stuff, advocacy will follow. So if you've let people make the decisions for themselves on the model structure, on the variables, on what the relativities might be, they're going to be willing to fight for the decisions that they have made. They're going to be willing to train their peer group and answer their questions. You don't want to answer every question from every single stakeholder. There's no way you're going to have time to do that. You need other people that are willing and on board with what you're doing to do that for you. And if this kind of, I've already said this, but if you've gotten people invested and empowered from day one, they've been able to make decisions, and they actually think the final result is going to work, you will get their advocacy to follow after that. All right. So just to bring this together here, you've seen this equation already, and again, this is just kind of what works from my experience, but I'm looking for people from various stakeholder groups with these characteristics because they tend to get things done. I'm going to give them the power to make decisions and decide things for themselves. They're already vested because of their goals or compensation or their sense of duty. And if I bring them in, let them decide things from day one, I will get their advocacy and results that we see get. So I've been through several first model version deployments, which are always the hardest, and I would say this is kind of my summary of how I approach getting that stakeholder group to buy in. Take from it what you will, I guess. And that's kind of it. Any questions?
Has church always used a committee-based decision, or is this something that you had to break down barriers and silos to actually implement?
They used a challenge type committee for the first version, but What I would say is that it didn't have all the characteristics that I had up there, and so I don't think it kind of went through exactly what needed to happen to achieve the results that were desired.
I have a question. So you mentioned some really impressive growth that you've seen in surplus and revenue. But how do you actually link the models and the whatever you developed?
So in this case, these models are largely deployed in what's probably about 2/3 of the written premium, a direct impact. So 2/3 of the company's written premium and their pricing and rating algorithms. And what we do is we just go back in time and we capture various checkpoints of premium, and we look before and after the model to make sure that it's accurately differentiating the risk quality. And as long as that's happening, that's a good, and to be honest, if you just look at the financial results the first couple of years after the model was deployed and a lot of the book was cleaned and scrubbed, it would be beyond happenstance what's happened. I'm not claiming that it was all of it. There's no way that's true, but it's certainly beyond happenstance.
Was it about elimination of some segments that were underperforming, or?
I wouldn't say segments, more individual customers, and just getting some people, we just couldn't price them to a high enough rate, to be honest, and we had to non-renew. But others, it was more about just dialing in their pricing and letting adverse selection happen on the competitors. So for example, one of our major competitors, Guide 1, their combined ratio, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before, had 3 letters and the second one was a 5. It was over 150% or something like that. So, and one of our other major competitors doesn't use any predictive analytics in their pricing algorithms. So I'm happy that they don't do that, because then all we need to do is just keep reversioning, let them just keep taking what I don't want for the price that we're going to give. And eventually, if we keep going, we should be able to take their business in the long run. That's actually what happened. Some of that growth is because one of those competitors had to shed a whole bunch of business because they were getting way over leveraged on their surplus. We were able to take a lot of it in the last couple of years. You work for an insurance company? Which company do you work for?
Century.
Okay. What department do you work in?
Analytics.
Okay. I figured. Other questions? All right, thank you. So what were you trying to ask us? I don't think I was understanding your question.
I think you answered my question later, because it's about operation, supervising rating, providing analytics.
We're a multiplier, in the price that comes along, and we multiply.
I mean, to meet all of these qualities.
Oh,
yes.
The multiplier piece. And we have our own SaaS engine. So that's where our relationship is a lot different.
Yeah, I came in late.
We're doing a lot of work that normally wouldn't be done. Yes, we're still an ISO company, but we figure out how to staff it.
I'm going to,
So that's part of the
I'm
work is to make sure that
going
we're done.
I'm going to
Take a walk and good idea. Divide. It's funny. No error. I want to talk.
It's kind of funny, I just think about this whole transformation, which is pretty good model that you read when you signed it, because I was one of the people that said, and so here underwriting
Sure,
hands
you got my email, you want to shoot me it?
well, when we did it, so, that, the system would predict model would give us our rating, and then we'd go back and look, to see what the underwriting did.
Yeah,
So
I took
here's
down for a
Randy
year.
and myself, and I did the HCM with Sean.
Just connect with
And
that, I can connect my OneDrive, I have my laptop.
That's
I mean, I
easier.
understand all.
What if it is on that side, on the left side? It's not.
I'm a Mac person.
It's great. Okay.
Cured mollusks. Okay, that's cool. I've never had mollusks before. They've had like clam chowder, but not like, out of the shell, That's delicious. But,
And down.
It's connected.
Did it open?
It wouldn't, it doesn't want to read my drive. I'll just connect to my OneDrive.
To the office.
Yeah. It wants me to sign in to do that. This is signed in with a guest user. I'll just connect it to my laptop. Mm-hmm.
This one finishes. So there's one.